Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, well, we'll start our introduction process. We still have a few people queued up in the restroom. We've got a big crowd here today. Welcome, everyone. It's our custom to go around the room and introduce ourselves, and then I'll introduce folks online, and then finally I'll introduce our speaker, Dale. So, my name is Grisha.
Jim. Connor.
Jeff.
Natalie.
Stephen. Andy.
I'm Michael.
Clark.
Ricky.
Tim.
John.
Tim. My name is Cass.
Matthew.
Laura.
I'm George.
Alex.
Jack. I'm Brad.
Marcus.
Jerry's coming. And then online we have Tom B., Bob, Tom C., Clint, Daniel, John, Tyler, Steve, Richard, Joe, Jeffrey, Frisco, Will, and on the phone is that Christian? Welcome everyone. Anybody here for the first time? Natalie, welcome. Anybody online first time? Okay, well, welcome everyone. Introduce Dale Borglum, who founded and directed the Hanuman Foundation Dying Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the first residential facility in the United States to support conscious dying. Working with Ram Dass and Stephen Levine, Dale helped found the conscious dying movement in the West. He has been the executive director of the Living Dying Project in Santa Fe since 1986 in the San Francisco Bay Area. And since 1986 in the San Francisco Bay Area. He is the co-author with Ram Dass, Daniel Bowman, and Dwarka Bonner of Journey of Awakening, a Meditator's Guidebook. Bantam Books and has taught meditation since 1974. Well, I'm clunking through this one. Sorry, Dale. Dale lectures and gives workshops on the topics of meditation, healing, spiritual support for those with life-threatening illness, and on caregiving as spiritual practice. He has taught with Ram Dass, Stephen Levine, Joan Halifax, Robert Thurman, Joanna Macy, Jack Cornfield, Annie Lamott, Jai Vital, and many others. He has a doctorate degree from Stanford University and a website, www.livingdying.org. And Dale, if you could just count to 5 and make sure everyone online can hear you okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I knew my PhD in math would come in handy.
Yep, you're ready.
Is that it? Ready to go? In Buddhism, they have this interesting notion that everybody's been your mother. So, happy Mother's Day. Donald Trump has been your mother. Happy Mother's Day. And that's not what the talk is going to be about, but in a way, being with Maharaji, this guru that Ram Dass went to meet and I was with also, he would say, see everyone as your mother. See it all as the Divine Mother. That's not necessarily a very Zen-like, Vipassana-like way of approaching things. But at the same time, for me, bringing my meditative practice in an integrated way into daily life, into all the busyness that I'm sure all of us are engaged in, bringing some devotional quality of seeing that quality in everybody to me, brings a lot more juiciness and interest than just trying to watch my breath. So I'll make that confession right off the bat. Today I would like to talk about awakened fearlessness. I had the great good fortune to be with many of the greatest meditation masters of the late 20th century. I traveled to India, I traveled to Tibet, and many of them came here to the Bay Area, of course, back in the day. They had very different kinds of personalities. Some of them were very intellectual and dry, and some were very juicy, and some got angry and some didn't. But what they all had in common was that they were fearless. They had no fear at all. And I would like to explore why that was and what that says to us. How our fear, our relationship with our fear, where fear comes from, in some ways, that investigation is the deepest practice. All fear is based in fear of death. And fear of death is exactly the place where you or I are lost in separateness, where we are not enlightened. So all other difficult emotions, the sadness, the anger, the narcissism, all those things come out of this basic quality of feeling separate, being lost in the delusion of separateness. And all true contemplative traditions, when you get into it deeply enough, get to the point where they say it's all one. Dzogchen, Mahamudra, Advaita Vedanta, what Ramana Maharshi talks about, what Adyashanti Eckhart Tolle is talking about today, the end of the spiritual path is the realization not that we just can love each other or even that we're connected, but in fact that we're one. We live in a universe. There's one song going on. And 3 guys just got the Nobel Prize in physics for mathematically proving quantum entanglement, which, without going too far down the road into physics here, some people in the back row are laughing for some unknown reason. Basically, they're saying that it's all one. There's just one thing. And that there are all kinds of experiments in physics that can't be explained unless it's all one. And all one, then, there's no fear because there's nothing outside to be afraid of. When I was with this teacher in India, Maharaji Nimkroli Baba, and I'm not trying to sell gurus here, but what he said was, I'm always in communion with you. Another teacher I was with said, be peaceful, I am everywhere. Now, who is this I that is everywhere? Who is this I that's in communion with us all the time so we can feel peaceful? And certainly, meditation is one of the most direct avenues into realizing that wholeness, into beginning to be aware of in our bodies what it is that we're feeling separate about. There are basically 2 main spiritual paths. One is the path of devotion, of dying into love, of loving everybody, being with what blocks our love. The other one is the path of self-inquiry, of meditation, of asking who we are. My friend Stephen Levine wrote the book, Who Dies? And we can ask right now, who's listening to this talk, right? Who's opening his mouth and flapping the words out? Who's that guy? And it is so easy to get caught in identification with the content of experience. Content is incredibly fascinating. My story is the most fascinating story in the world to me, as yours probably is to you. right? And the beginning stages of meditation are clearly about beginning to realize that we aren't the content. That, in fact, that content doesn't cause suffering. I work with dying people. I'm often at the bedside of people who are dying. Cancer does not cause suffering. Resistance to cancer causes suffering. Divorce does not cause suffering. Resistance to divorce causes suffering. And it's very difficult to work with suffering if we aren't clearly mindful of how the suffering's arising. If we're blaming the environment, we're blaming the politics, we're blaming the weather, we're blaming the traffic, we're blaming our bodies for how it is that we're feeling. And particularly this fundamental emotion of fear. Now, as I said, I'm kind of a recovering scientist, and I really like to approach spiritual unfolding in the most practical possible way. And for many of us, that really involves bringing in a psychological component to how we're practicing. As I said, I've been at the bedside of so many people who have died, and the Living Dying Project that I'm the director of offers, quote, spiritual support for people at the end of their lives, for caregivers, for people who are grieving. So people come to us saying, I want spiritual support. But almost never does somebody come saying, I want spiritual support, without a real good bag of fear, guilt, and shame that makes it very difficult to dive into what could be called spiritual support. That it's very difficult to disentangle our psychological contractedness and our spiritual unfolding. So let's look at some ways to do that. And I'm going to suggest 3 or 4 ways of really directly dealing with fear, and then hopefully getting to that place where we're beyond fear. So imagine a tiny little baby from the ages of even pre-babiness, halfway through gestation into about 1 year old. And he is learning about being grounded. He is learning to trust being here now, being physical. That it's safe to just be here, to be with your breath, to be with your life, whatever's going on. And to the extent that during this time in your life, there was neglect, abandonment, illness, trauma, accident, feeding difficulty, any number of things, you got the message that it's not entirely safe to be in your body here now. That you weren't really feeling grounded. And particularly when something difficult, something challenging is going on in life. Like maybe you're thinking about the current election cycle. It's hard to think about that and not jump up in the head and start saying, oh, if this thing happened, then that wouldn't be good. Or no matter what your politics are, everybody thinks the other people is the enemy, pretty much. Right? There's a lot of divisiveness. So is it possible to be reading the news about politics and be embodied, be grounded, feeling that sense of support and nourishment? So one way, maybe one of the most direct ways of dealing with fear, is to get grounded, to inhabit the root chakra, whose deepen, the emotion that makes it difficult to be grounded, is fear. So that right now, you're probably listening to my words, collecting them, saying, isn't that interesting, or isn't that not so interesting, whatever. Is it possible to, at the same time as you're taking in these words, is it possible to inhabit that part of your body? Like as you're breathing out, that just drop down through the base of your torso into the earth that supports. And feel that supportive, nurturing energy. It's earth element, it's mother. Mother's Day, here it is. Can we be with the earth element, mother quality that supports? And can we do this at the same time as we're collecting information, as we're living our lives? So that there's a difference. To me, there's a somatic difference between acting out of a sense of I'm grounded, I'm present, it's safe to be here, versus this is dangerous, I've got to figure it out, right? That there's a sense of contractedness then. And can one begin to pay attention to that sense of that background fear that's almost always there? It's hard to pay attention to something if there's not a contrast to it. You can't feel cold if you're always cold. If you're an Eskimo living up by the North Pole, it doesn't feel like it's cold. It feels like that's the way it is. But if it's hot and cold, like today, maybe the sun's coming out, but San Francisco, you get the changes, right? So that until we really can feel the fear, can go beyond the fear, it's going to be difficult to work with it. Until we can get underneath it at times. So that right now, is it possible to hear what I'm saying? And it's not that you're paying attention to being grounded, it's you're paying attention from being grounded. That you're inhabiting energetically a part of your body that most of us have at least partly, if not largely, abandoned. Living up in our heads. Living a conceptual distance away from direct experience. Walt Whitman said, "Sometimes touching another human being is almost more than I can bear." You felt that, I felt that. And yet how seldom do we feel that vulnerability? And until we can begin to work with fear in that very direct way, then the vulnerability of the open heart is going to be too scary unless we happen to be in a very supportive environment, right? The sun is out, the person you're with is very loving, there's no Republicans anywhere in sight, everything's good to go. Okay. My earliest memory in life is being very happy, being joyful, feeling just joy being in my body. I was maybe 9 months old. I couldn't walk yet. I was crawling. I saw this object on the floor that turned out to be a bobby pin. And you might guess what happened next. I saw 2 holes in the wall. And put the bobby pin into the holes in the wall, because obviously those 2 things go in those 2 holes, right? So what did I learn? And I had very loving, supportive parents. That the world is not necessarily a safe place. That by following my joy, I could get the shock of my life. Some people in this room had possibly not very loving parents. There was more abandonment, more abuse in certain ways. So that, in a way, to go beyond fear means beginning to have a relationship with it. And I have put together a healing paradigm that I kind of jokingly call the tantric 3-step, right? As opposed to the country 2-step dance. This is the tantric 3-step. And the first step is, can one be mindful of what it feels like? Not what you're thinking about it. Usually when fear arises, almost always when fear arises, we automatically go to the trigger. We get fixated on, I'm afraid of that, I'm afraid of him, I'm afraid of what might happen, rather than what does it actually feel like to be afraid? And almost always when we're afraid, we abandon the root, We get up in our heads. There's a tightness in the belly. Learning to train yourself to go beyond the narrative, go beyond the trigger, and begin to feel the fear itself. I remember the first time I really felt fear in my body, and it was shocking to me. I was about 20 years old, and I had been afraid off and on all my life, and it just happened to be a circumstance where I was walking in the sunshine on a beautiful California June day, and for a certain reason I was afraid of something, but the environment was so supportive that I could feel the fear, and I realized I'd never felt it before. Okay, so healing happens only through contact. It doesn't happen by thinking about it. It doesn't happen by understanding it. I mean, that could be a first step. But the first stage of healing happens, can I go beyond the narrative? Can I feel fear itself? Now, the Buddha said, and he's always quotable, the Buddha said, when you hear the Heart Sutra, if you're not terrified and startled, you don't understand the Heart Sutra. Okay, the Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. That all of this is empty of solid existence in the way that those three guys that got the Nobel Prize are telling us about. That this world is not solid in the way we think it is. And yet, we live in the delusion of solidness. That there's a solid reality out there. That when I hold up my pen, everybody sees the same thing. But if there were a bat or a dog in the room, they would be seeing something very different, wouldn't they? Because they have a different kind of consciousness. And how do I know that your consciousness is the same as mine? So that's kind of getting theoretical. But the point is that just existence itself can be kind of scary. Here's a quote from Ernest Becker, who got the Pulitzer Prize for writing The Denial of Death. The irony of man's condition is that the deepest need is to be free of the anxiety of death and annihilation. But it is life itself which awakens this fear. And so we must shrink from being fully alive. So, first step, can we be with that background anxiety that's almost always there? That's there right now. If it were completely gone, there would be a radiance, there would be an openness that most of us feel only occasionally. We get used to that background fear as the human condition. We accept it. So the first step, can I be with it nakedly, intimately, just the way it is? And then the second step is, can I open my heart to that? Can I feel compassion for the part of me that has been lost in fear, that has limited my ability to love and to live? So now there's two things to do. Embodied mindfulness, going beyond the concepts, and then opening our heart to something. The third step of the Tantric three-step is Tantra, Vajrayana Buddhism. That even this emotion, do we have some tankas around? There's Avalokiteshvara over there, and it's kind of hard to tell who that is. But that in Vajrayana Buddhism, after you've gone into a deep enough mindfulness training and a compassionate training in compassion, then one is given deity practices. You go in and you see the Lama, and he or she bops you on the head with a magic box and gives you a visualization and a mantra and says, now you are Chinrezi, now you are Tara. That the deity is not something that's only outside, right? It is still outside, but it's inside, it's everything. That it's all awakened energy. That even the fear is a healing message. Emotions aren't good or bad. They're just exactly what they are. Okay, so we're going from, in the first stage, paying attention to the content, being mindful of the content, to, in the second stage, what is our relationship with the content of our lives? Can it be a compassionate, loving relationship? To the third stage of what is the nature of the content itself? And when we're deeply enough into mindfulness and compassion, it's revealed that the nature of each arising is equally sacred. That whiskey is just as much God as chamomile tea, thank goodness. Some laugh more than others at that one. We don't know why. Okay. So, I studied with this guy Trungpa Rinpoche. Some of you may know about him. Let me just tell you a couple of really quick stories about him and fear. In one story, he was walking from one monastery to another with his attendant. And they had almost gotten to the second monastery, and they had to go by a house on the road that had a huge Tibetan Mastiff dog chained to the front of the house. When I went to Tibet, the one thing I brought was bear spray. I mean, these dogs are huge dogs. You don't want to get in an argument with a Tibetan Mastiff dog. And this dog does not like people walking so close by his house. He was an angry dog. And just as they got by the house, the dog broke the chain. He was so angry. And he came running at Trungpa and the attendant. The attendant went running toward the monastery door, hoping he could get there before the dog. And Trungpa went running at the dog, barking. And the dog ran away the other direction. Okay. Another story is that he was driving with some students of his from Boulder, Colorado, where his main center was, to Jackson Hole, where he had a meditation retreat center. And if you've ever driven from Boulder, Colorado to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, it's just cowboy country. I mean, it's cowboy country. Just leave it at that. And they stopped in the evening, at night, at a cowboy bar. Trungpa said, let's stop here and have a few beers. So they go into this cowboy bar, and there's some cowboys playing pool. And as they came in, one of the guys playing pool made a racist remark about the slant-eye Tibetan guy that just came in the door, which didn't make Trungpa too happy, probably. So a little time went by, and just as this man who made the racist remark was going to take his next pool shot, Trungpa got up. He was walking toward the bar, supposedly to get another beer, and he bumped into the guy just as he'd made his shot and ruined the guy's pool shot. And the guy gets, what are you doing? Who do you think you are? But he let it go. Trungpa did it a second time, but like a little bit later, right? And now the guy was really mad. And all these other guys in the bar are his friends, right? When he did it a third time, the guy said, now you've gone too far, and he came at Trungpa, and Trungpa pulled out a water pistol and squirted him in the face. Now, how can you beat somebody up who just squirted you in the face with a water pistol, right? I mean, if somebody is truly fearless, it's an unmistakable event. When you meet somebody in that state who has absolutely no fear, it is in a way like a seismic shift goes on inside of you. You can really feel what it's like to be with somebody who has no fear. Let me read you a couple of things that my Guru Maharaji said. He said, if you trust in God, you don't have any fear. He said, it is better to trust in God than to try to figure things out. Right? So, I would guess that a lot of people in this room have been meditating for years. Maybe some of you for decades. I've been meditating for over 50 years, and I'm still like this. So, Whatever that means, of course. Of course, Ram Dass did say that if you're a son of a bitch and you get enlightened, you'll be an enlightened son of a bitch. It's not that our personality falls away, it's just that we're not identified with it so much. But is it possible then to work with our fear in a way that we can allow ourselves to be who we are without having to feel that we're less than, that something's stuck, that it's usually we begin practice from the standpoint of I'm here to fix something. If I meditate enough, I can push the fear away. I can get to a better place. And if we look at the Tantric 3-step, it's not about making the fear go away. It's about having an immediate, loving, wise relationship with what the experience is. Okay. The third way of working with fear is to deepen your faith. When we were in India, Ram Dass had this slogan, fear, comma, no faith. Faith, comma, no fear. So that's, so far we've been talking about, you've got all this fear and you've got less faith. What can we do to bring the fear down? Here we're saying, we're feeling afraid. Can we deepen our faith? What do you have faith in? Maybe you don't have a guru. Maybe you have faith in taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Maybe you have faith in awareness itself. We're meditating. There's obviously some assumed faith that mindfulness works. Buddhism, I think they don't sell it themselves well enough in the sense that there's this underlying assumption that we're whole already, that nothing needs to be fixed. We just need to let go of the assumption, the concepts, the contractions, where we're deluding ourselves. So that as practice deepens, our relationship with fear deepens, and we go from trying to fix it to push it away to, on the other hand, being able to be with it and realize that that's okay. That maybe fearlessness is being able to be with fear and not be lost in it, to allow it to be there all by itself. So I'm supposed to leave 10 minutes for... Okay, so many things to say, so little time, right? I'd just like to point out that in English we say, I am afraid. In Spanish, yo tengo miedo. I have fear. In Tibetan, fear is here. Think of the different relationships that those ways of languaging our relationship with fear imply. I am afraid. You're not afraid. It's just a passing mind-body experience. It's an ephemeral cloud in the vast, boundless sky of heart-mind. I have fear. Fear is here. Versus I am fear. So let's see if I have any glorious closing little quote here or something. So the Living Dying Project has a speaker series. We're going to have we had this person, Tenzin Palmo, last year. She's an elderly Tibetan nun, really a beautiful being. And she said, fear is the last boundary of the ego. Sometimes I say to people, hold yourself like an injured animal. Can we be with our fear in that tender way? Not as the enemy, but something that's trying to get us to soften, to surrender. That realizing that as practice deepens, it's at least as much about surrender and about receiving as about doing something. That I'm a good meditator, right? And let me just give a really quick plug to the Living Dying Project. We do have this website, livingdying.org. It's the best site on the internet, most complete site about conscious dying. There's a lot of free material, talks, lectures, guided meditations. I have a free every other Saturday spiritual support group. We had it yesterday. There's 1,000 people in a Zoom group. It's really popular because it's free. And we have free of charge support groups for people who are grieving, people who are caregivers, and people who have critical illnesses. We have online trainings for people who want to deepen their conscious relationship with living and dying. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. Please. Yes.
Can you elaborate more or give instructions on connecting with the root chakra? Connecting with the root chakra, grounding the root chakra. So I've learned various ways of doing that.
Okay.
And so I'm just sort of curious.
Okay.
Guide us.
So, let's see how succinct I can make this. One of the things I do in this online workshop we have is show how the awakening of the chakras, the yanas of Buddhism, the 12-step programs, the stages of early childhood development are all saying the same thing in a way that I think is really incredibly useful. At least it has been for me and for a lot of people I work with. So that, as I mentioned before, second trimester in utero to about 1 year old, this little being is learning to be grounded, to trust being present, to trust being physical. And the demon of that is fear. Like my situation of putting the bobby pin in the electrical outlet. It's really scary. Maybe it's not safe to be here. Maybe it's not safe to follow my curiosity. So that we all had experiences, not necessarily like that one, but difficult experiences early on in life. So that now we're adults and we're not as vulnerable as we were then. The demon of the second chakra is guilt. The third chakra is shame, getting centered. Second and third chakra is about being centered, the place from which martial arts are done. So that right now, as I kind of suggested, can you be listening to me and at the same time feeling grounded, inhabiting energetically, not paying attention to, but more paying attention from this part of your body. And a lot of people approach spirituality from, I want to be in my heart, I want to dissolve, I want to be spiritual, and they have avoided the groundwork. All of these wonderful Eastern practices from Hinduism and Buddhism were developed by and for Asian people a long time ago who were running around barefoot and didn't have an iPhone, right? And it was assumed that you were grounded and centered, that you liked yourself. On the Dalai Lama's third visit to America, he said, now I'm beginning to understand, and it makes me very sad, you Americans don't like yourselves. He couldn't believe that people had low self-esteem. He would come up to people and say, do you have this low self-esteem? And they would say yes, and it's because people in Tibet don't feel that. They've got another set of problems. But it's kind of assumed that you're inhabiting the sense of, I'm here, it's safe to be here now, so that I can begin to dive into this process of disidentifying with who I think I am and identifying with who I really am. So, first chakra, about being here, being physical. Second chakra, guilt, about moving into the world, what you're doing. Third chakra, shame, about who you are. And as I say, almost everybody that comes to me and wants to, quote, die spiritually, we need to do some work with fear, guilt, and shame. Imagine dying feeling guilty and ashamed of who you are. It's not easy. So, Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to go into that. I am actually this week going to be, I think, putting together a 2-hour, very short course on grounding and centering, working with fear, guilt, and shame, which will be probably dropping onto our website, hopefully this month or next month. Anybody else, please? Yes.
Can you talk about what led you to get involved in living in conscious dying as a kind of a life pursuit?
Well, I got a PhD in math, and I went to India, and I came home, and I didn't want to be a mathematician. I had enough psychedelics floating around my bloodstream that I changed my life plan at that point. And I had gotten to be pretty good friends with Ram Dass and became the executive director of his nonprofit foundation, the Hanuman Foundation. And we were living in Santa Cruz together. Stephen Levine was living on the other side of town. And Ram Dass taught a workshop at which Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came as a student, and at which Stephen was the meditation teacher. So Stephen started working with Elizabeth, and eventually they parted ways amicably, and Ram Dass and I started working with Stephen. So it just kind of fell into my lap. And by way of confession, I have very little interest in death. I want to awaken. Trungpa said that until you come into intimate contact with death, your spiritual practice will have the quality of you being a dilettante. You can meditate till your knees fall off. Until you know in your bones that you're going to die, you can improve your personality, get calmer, do things like that. But until you really know you're going to die and you don't know when, that we really don't know we're getting out of this room alive. We don't. Right? Until you know that you might die during this meditation or during this talk, then it's kind of arranging the bedclothes and fluffing up the pillows. There's that Kabir poem, and he's saying, if you know you're going to die, why are you wasting your time arranging the pillows and fluffing up the bedding? And let's get on with it. Like, we're going to die. Okay. Maybe another one, short one. Yeah, please.
Just given you have so much experience over the decades, are you seeing any progress over the generations with managing problems with self-esteem? Are generations getting better at managing problems, or is it just staying static and every individual has to manage it as best they can?
Yeah, what a great question. I don't know if I'm any more expert on that than anybody else necessarily. I've got a 21-year-old son, believe it or not, who's about to graduate from UCLA if they don't tear the place down before commencement. But I have great hope in the younger generation. I'm at a certain age that I protested the Vietnam War, and my parents in that generation thought we were all kind of crazy, and so yeah, I mean, each generation has its own set of problems, but when I look at my son, how much more mature and wise and he is than I was at that age, it's like almost shocking in a certain way. So I guess that's the best I got. I mean, I think I have faith in you, so go for us. I mean, really all it takes, I mean, if we look at what's going on with the environment, with politics, with society, with homelessness, with immigration, with war, and extrapolate, it looks bad in so many different dimensions. But then again, Lincoln and Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, one man, one person who had a depth of nonviolence and really had gone beyond fear in a very deep way, was able to change the course of a nation. And It's probably not going to be Biden or Trump that's going to be changing things, but maybe it's you. Maybe it's, somebody walking down the street here. We don't know. And at the same time, it could also be that the world needs half of the population to die before the next thing happens. We don't know, right? I mean, I work with cancer patients often, and people have to get sick enough to admit that they need help before they can start healing. Until you know you're sick enough. Like, I thought 9/11 would do that. It didn't do that. I thought the pandemic would do that. It moved the needle a little bit. But who knows what it's going to take to get the collective to say, hey, this is not working. And my sense is that all I can do is what I'm doing. I've got this niche where I come to here and talk to you guys, and I've got the Living Dying Project, and I offer that to God, and let's see what happens next. So I'm supposed to stop talking now so we can make some announcements or something, I guess, right? Thank you all so very much.
One more question.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Gail, and you always give such a great talk. And it's funny you focused on fear. I was thinking, while I was driving over here today, how fearless Ramdas could be. But I never saw the common denominator amongst teachers in general about that. That's very, it's critical. It's important.
Yes.
Yeah. You got to become a counterphobic in a way.
Who's counterphobic?
I think they require some degree of counterphobic.
I'm a counterphobic 6, by the way. Not that we're going to talk about the Enneagram, that's a wrap.
Dealing with fear by moving toward it.
Yeah. So, just one little quick quote. Payment children. Being fearless is not being without fear. Being fearless is feeling the fear and stepping forward anyway.
Tom online has his hand up. Do you have another minute?
I'm sorry?
Do you mind? Tom had his hand up. Do you mind another question? Okay.
That's up to you. I just work here.
Tom, you want to?
Hey, Dale. Thanks again for a wonderful talk, as always. I have a question. So Friday night, 2 friends died instantly in a head-on car collision down in San Diego. And so, I'm seeing 2 things sort of arise, and that is, one is, this sort of wake up, like, oh, life is short, the immediacy of it, stop fluffing the pillows, as you said. The other one was sort of this, probably grounded in fear, but sort of this caution, like, wow, I better be more careful when I get out and drive too, because not that I'm afraid of dying, but I don't want to leave my other friends in a lurch feeling, like, what hole would I leave if I were suddenly vaporized and gone, And so how do you balance, I don't know, I mean, maybe there's no lesson to take from it or something, but I just have these 2 competing sort of emotions or feelings going on. How do you make sense of those 2? Does that make sense?
So I'm trying to get the 2 of them. One of them is, you're not afraid of dying, but you should drive better?
No, one of them is sort of the awakening to the immediacy and the preciousness of life and, like, don't fluff the pillows.
Yeah.
But the other one is, oh my God, I should be more cautious. Is so sort of fear-based. One is sort of awakening, to the reality. The other one is sort of fear, like, be more careful when you step out the front door.
Okay. So you said in the first iteration of the question, I'm not afraid of dying, but maybe I should pay more attention when I'm driving. And I would suggest that you are afraid of dying, and that everybody's afraid of dying until they're enlightened. You might not be afraid of the concept of dying. That's a whole different thing than being afraid of dying. If I held your head underwater, you would be afraid of dying, right? So that your question about this balance of these 2 things is in a way kind of based on a fallacy, that you're not afraid of dying. And that really by being able to be with the fear that arises and is going to fade away as the tragic deaths of your friend fades into the rearview mirror. That in a week or two, it's not going to be in the forefront of your consciousness anymore. That to be able to be with fear allows you to drive better. It's not becoming more cautious. It's by having a relationship with fear, you're going to be more present as you're driving. You're going to be less distracted. It's not, I've got to be more careful. It's can I be more present? Can I open up to life itself? Can I be with the anxiety that makes me a shitty driver? Right?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Can we hear from our host?
Yeah, hi, I'm the host today, so please stay and enjoy the fellowship with the Sangha. We have some vegan treats, and there's hot water for tea. So if you do have tea, just leave your cup in the sink afterwards, and I'll take care of cleaning it. I will be coming around with a Dana bowl. Dana is the Pali word for generosity, and your generosity helps pay for this rent of this wonderful center, down to our speakers, the printing of and mailing of our newsletter, which goes largely to people who are incarcerated, and generally meet the expenses of our group. So whatever you're willing to donate is gratefully accepted. Some people gather at the front door at around 12:30 to go to lunch, and anybody's welcome to join in that. And I think that's all. And there is a sign-up sheet. Yes, if you'd like to be included in our directory of people, visitors to our Sangha, then please use the sign-up sheet. So the credentials out here.
Cass, it kind of came up last week, but when you go around with the Dana bowl, can we call it the Dana sachet?
I'll put some sachet into it today.
And if you're interested in the Living Dying Project, please come to our website and just sign up on the mailing list, and you'll be informed of events and things like that.
Any other announcements? Just a plug for service. If you are willing to step up and help with hosting, creating refreshments, or learning how to set up the hybrid equipment and become a facilitator, please let someone on the board know, me or Jeff or Cass or Michael or any of us. And also, especially online, Tom today was our online co-host, so that last week we had an issue with sound and we didn't really know, we weren't seeing the chat. In fact, there's a chat right now. So if someone online would be willing each week to just be the co-host and be able to speak up if there's an issue, watch the chat, and be a helpful online presence for the Zoom friends, that would be great. Let us know if you're willing to do that. And Dale, we have our traditional closing, but do you have any dedication of merit that you would like to share?
Just please do the traditional one.
Okay, we'll gather in a circle for that. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow, and may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives. Wow. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.